They thought I was too old to fight back, too fragile to hold on to the life I built. My own children tried to strip me of my home, my dignity, even my sanity, but they never expected the secret their father left behind, or the strength I had yet to reveal. The sound of the waves was the first thing I heard that morning. A steady rhythm against the frozen edge of Lake Michigan. Even in January, the water had its own voice, whispering through the glass panes of my old Evanston home. I rose from bed slowly, my bones protesting, and let my eyes wander across the familiar room. Jonathan's fishing rod still leaned in the corner, as though he might come back any moment to take it down to the pier. The photograph from our 1975 honeymoon, him in his wide-collared shirt, me with sunburnt cheeks, still smiled back at me from the dresser. These things were no longer just objects. They were companions, binding me to a time when laughter filled this house more than silence. I walked through the kitchen and rested my hand on the table where Jonathan once teased me about burnt pancakes. That table had witnessed our quarrels, our reconciliations, and the morning rituals of a marriage that lasted more than 40 years. Now it felt too large for a single plate, a single cup of tea. The house was both comfort and burden, too big for me, yet too alive with memories to leave behind. The shrill of the telephone startled me. For a second, I thought of Jonathan. But of course it wasn't him. It was Aaron. His voice, sharp and hurried, filled my ear. "Mom, we need a family meeting tonight. It's about important financial decisions." No greeting. No inquiry after my health. Just business, delivered like a command. His words left a knot in my stomach, one that tightened with each syllable. I could almost hear the impatience in his breath, the tapping of his finger on a desk somewhere, waiting for me to agree. When I put the receiver down, the room seemed colder. Jonathan had once warned me about Aaron. In those quiet moments, husbands sometimes share. He's too hungry for more. Reba. Always chasing, never content. I used to dismiss it as father-son friction. Now, with Jonathan gone 3 years, I wondered if he had seen something I refused to see. I sat by the window, watching the waves push relentlessly against the shore. They never stopped. They wore the stones smooth, year after year. I thought of myself then, of how easily I had allowed the children's demands to shape me, to grind away at my will. Was I being paranoid and sensing danger in Aaron's words? Or was I finally waking to the truth? The water roared louder in my ears. Somewhere inside, I felt the warning. Tonight's meeting would not be about family or about care. It would be about power and what they could take from me if I let them. The evening light stretched long shadows across the living room, the tall windows framing Lake Michigan's frozen surface, like a painting in shades of silver and blue. The house felt grand as always, but the silence was heavy. I had polished the wooden table, lit a lamp in the corner, even laid out cups for coffee, as though tidiness might protect me from what was coming. Yet inside, a chill I could not shake kept crawling up my spine. The doorbell rang sharply, and the house lost its stillness. Aaron entered first, brisk, his coat barely off before he produced a manila folder. Jessica followed, her smile polite but cold, Greg trailing behind with the air of a man who had already judged the room. They carried with them a different temperature, one that clashed with the warmth I tried to preserve within these walls. Aaron spread papers across the table with the precision of a salesman. "I had an appraisal done," he said, tapping the numbers as if they were commandments. $2.5 million, Mom. That's what the house is worth. You don't need all this space. A senior apartment would be more suitable." His words fell like ice chips. Jessica leaned forward, her voice softer, but no less cutting. "Think of what this money could do for the family's future. College funds, security, even travel. We're not saying give it all away. Just share what you don't need anymore." Me. Greg adjusted his cufflinks and added smoothly. "It's not practical, Reba. Holding on to something this big. Nostalgia is understandable, but it doesn't pay the bills." His tone was firm, rehearsed, like a verdict already written. I sat in the armchair where Jonathan once read his newspapers. my fingers twisting the hem of my sleeve. "This house is my home," I murmured. "It holds my life. With your father." Erin's eyes narrowed. "Your life with Dad is over, Mom. You're just a stingy old woman hoarding Dad's legacy while the rest of us struggle." The words cut deeper than I imagined they could. Stingy. Old. A hoarder of memories. As if love itself was waste. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought I might choke. My own son. The boy I once held through nights of fever. Now standing before me as prosecutor. Jessica did not speak, but her silence was approval enough. Greg leaned back, arms folded, watching me with the satisfaction of a man who had pressed the right button. The room seemed to close in, the walls too near, the air too thin. My hands trembled as I rose. "Excuse me," I said quietly, not trusting my voice to hold. I moved to the kitchen, each step heavy, each breath shallow. There, away from their eyes, I pressed my palms to the counter and bent forward, fighting the tears that burned behind my eyes. Through the window I could see the frozen lake, its surface hard and unyielding. Once, it had mirrored the sky in endless change. Now it stood locked, brittle, indifferent, just like the bond with my children. In the silence of that kitchen, I whispered his name. "Jonathan, I wish you were here." My voice cracked into the emptiness, and the only answer was the groan of the old house against the winter wind. The library smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a scent that stirred something deep inside me. It had been years since I walked into the Evanston Library without Jonathan by my side. We used to come here together, sometimes for research, sometimes only to browse and argue gently over which novels deserved a place on our shelf. Now, the tall shelves rose like silent guardians around me, and I felt small beneath their weight. On the notice board near the entrance, a brightly colored flyer caught my eye. "Retirees Book Club, the 10th of March meeting. Bring your favorite book. Share a memory. Find new friends." The words seemed almost to shine against the dull winter light. My heart fluttered in hesitation. New friends? At my age? Still, my fingers closed around the strap of my handbag, where I had slipped in a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird before leaving home. Jonathan and I had read it aloud to each other during our early years of marriage. Perhaps fate had brought me here. I walked into the small conference room. Warm lamplight glowed against pale walls, and a circle of chairs was already filling with men and women in their 60s and 70s. Their voices carried laughter, low and easy, like music I had not heard in a long time. I hesitated at the doorway, but someone gestured me in, smiling as though they had been waiting just for me. When my turn came, I rose with trembling hands, holding my book close to my chest. "This was Jonathan's favorite," I began, and my voice caught on his name. "We read it together during our first year of marriage. He used to say Atticus Finch reminded him of the man he wanted to become: honorable, patient." The words quivered in the air, but no one rushed me. No one sighed in impatience. Instead, heads nodded, eyes softened, and I felt for the first time that my grief was not an embarrassment, but a story they were willing to hold with me. After the meeting, a woman with short silver hair and lively eyes came up to me. "You spoke beautifully," she said, her tone warm. "I'm Ellen, retired nurse, and I make terrible coffee at home. Would you care to join me for a decent cup across the street?" We laughed together, a sound that surprised me with its freedom. At the cafe, Ellen's humor filled the air. She spoke of long nights in hospital wards, of the joy of retirement, of her stubborn rose bushes. I found myself talking too about Jonathan, about the lake house, even about the silence that had become my constant companion. With her, I did not feel judged, only understood. That evening, when I returned home, the red light on the answering machine blinked like an accusation. Erin's voice, clipped and cold. "Mom, you have to think about your future. Downsizing is the practical choice. We'll help you arrange it." Then Jessica's softer tone followed. "It's for your own good. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Their voices hung in the air long after the machine fell silent, heavy with condescension, as though I were incapable of making choices for myself. I stood there, staring at the blinking light, And then I looked at the book still in my hand. Its pages smelled of dust and memory, but also of possibility. For the first time since Jonathan's death, I felt like more than a leftover. The book club had given me a glimpse of life beyond obedience. A chapter not yet written. Books, I realized, were not only about stories, they were about beginnings. Perhaps mine was just starting again. The table had been set with care, though my appetite had dwindled long before dinner. I laid out the good china, the silver that Jonathan always polished himself on special occasions. It was my attempt to keep civility alive, to pretend family could still gather around a meal without tearing one another apart. Outside, the lake glimmered beneath the fading light, its surface still frozen, a mirror that showed me only hardness. We began the meal stiffly, exchanging shallow remarks about the weather and Jessica's children. I tried to believe, if only for a few moments, that we might eat in peace. But I should have known better. Midway through the roast chicken, I heard the front door open again. I frowned. Hadn't everyone already arrived? A man in a tailored suit stepped into the dining room, smiling as though he belonged here. Aaron rose with a flourish. "Mom, this is Michael. A realtor. He's just here to take a quick look at the house." The words hit me like a slap. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. "A realtor? Without asking me?" Jessica leaned forward, her tone calm, almost maternal. "It's just a tour, Reba. Nothing final. You don't need to get upset." But upset was too small a word. My sanctuary, the very heart of my memories with Jonathan, was being paraded before a stranger, as though I were already gone. The walls seemed to shudder with the insult. Aaron's voice cut through my fury. "You're not thinking straight, Mom. This is for your safety. The house is too big. You could fall. Or the heating could fail. This is practical. Practical." As if love and history were inconveniences to be swept aside for convenience. My chest tightened. Betrayal poured into my veins. Hot and cold, all at once. I pushed back my chair, unable to sit there any longer under their watchful, calculating eyes. Without a word, I climbed the staircase. Every step, a battle against the pounding of my heart. In my bedroom, the familiar shadows wrapped around me. I pressed my back to the door, breath ragged. My sanctuary had been broken, violated by their ambition. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them down. Then, as I sank onto Jonathan's old armchair, I noticed something on the top shelf of the wardrobe. A sealed envelope, with my name, written in his handwriting. Steady and bold. With trembling fingers I tore it open. His words spilled out like balm and fire all at once. "Reba, if ever the children turn against you, remember that I have left safeguards. Trust Tom. He knows everything. Do not let them corner you. Protect yourself, and protect what we built together." I pressed the paper to my chest, as though it could carry his heartbeat back to me. Jonathan had known. He had seen the hunger in Aaron's eyes, the quiet entitlement in Jessica's tone, and he had prepared for it. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. Ellen answered on the second ring. My voice cracked. "They brought a realtor tonight, without even asking. They mean to strip me of this house." There was a pause, and then Ellen's firm, steady voice. "Reba, listen to me. Call Tom. Jonathan trusted him. Don't wait. Don't let them do this to you." I looked around the room, the walls heavy with memory, and I understood. The house had been violated tonight, just as my dignity had. But the letter, Jonathan's letter, was a lifeline. His voice, reaching across time, telling me I was not alone. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief rising inside me. I felt resolve. Chicago's loop was alive with its usual frenzy horns blaring, footsteps echoing across the pavements, businessmen rushing past with phones glued to their ears. But as I climbed the narrow stairs to Tom's law office, I felt as though the whole world had slowed, leaving only the heavy thump of my heartbeat in my chest. My palms were damp. The letter from Jonathan folded and refolded until the paper had softened under my touch. Tom's office was a small, cluttered place, the kind of room where every inch of space was filled with paper and memory. Law books leaned dangerously on the shelves, and the blinds let in only slivers of daylight, striping the room with alternating light and shadow. He rose as I entered, his gray hair and lined face carrying the same kindness I remembered from the days when Jonathan used to bring him over for dinner. "Reba," he said gently, offering me a seat. "I wondered when you might come." I sat, clutching my handbag, my throat dry. "Jonathan, he left me a letter. He mentioned safeguards. He said to trust you." Tom nodded, as though none of this surprised him. He reached into a locked drawer and placed a thick file on the desk. His voice was steady, precise. "Your husband was a careful man. He knew there might come a time when Aaron or Jessica's ambitions outweighed their respect for you. He asked me to prepare for that possibility." I leaned forward, hardly breathing. He opened the file and slid a document across the desk. "This is a codicil to his will. It states clearly, any family member who disrespects, coerces, or attempts to manipulate you regarding your finances or property will forfeit their inheritance permanently." The words on the page seemed to blur, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. Relief washed over me, cold and hot all at once. Jonathan had seen what I refused to see. He had not left me alone. My eyes filled as I whispered, "He knew." Tom continued, his tone shifting from legal to personal. "We already have evidence, Reba. Aaron's remark that you were a stingy old woman was documented during the February meeting, and his attempts to pressure you further are noted. If needed, this can be enforced immediately." My chest ached with the collision of emotions. Grief, because Jonathan's foresight came from a place of doubt in our own children. Fury, because those doubts had been proven right. And yet, a strange, rising strength coursed through me because he had trusted me enough to defend myself. I looked up at Tom, voice trembling. "If I enforce this now, it will end everything with them. If I wait, maybe I'll see just how far they'll go." He studied me carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "Your husband trusted your strength, Reba. Maybe now it's time you trust it too." The words settled inside me like a weight and a light at the same time. Strength. I had thought myself too old, too fragile to fight, yet here was proof. I was not powerless. The codicil was more than paper. It was a shield against their cruelty, a sword if I chose to wield it. As I left Tom's office, the city noise struck me again, louder than before, yet less overwhelming. The crowds rushed by, indifferent to my battle, but I walked among them with a secret armor. For the first time in years, I did not feel like prey, waiting to be devoured. I felt like a woman, carrying a weapon, hidden, but ready. I pressed Jonathan's letter against my heart as I hailed a cab. The war was not over. It had hardly begun. But now, I was no longer only defending memories. I was preparing to defend myself. The afternoon sun stretched a golden haze across my backyard, warming the grass that had just begun to thicken with summer. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, fairy lights strung along the fence like delicate constellations waiting for dusk. The scent of fresh lemonade, mixed with lilacs from the garden. For weeks I had prepared for this, convincing myself that if I opened my home to the community, it would no longer feel like a fortress under siege, but a place of life. Once more, the neighbors came first, retirees from down the street, a mother with her young daughter, even the postman who often lingered at my gate for conversation. Then the book club arrived, their laughter filling the yard, their arms carrying novels and plates of biscuits. Ellen swept in like a warm gust of wind, planting a kiss on my cheek and whispering, "This is wonderful, Reba. You've brought us all together." And then, almost silently, Ethan appeared. My grandson hovered awkwardly at the edge of the gathering, his tall frame bent slightly as if to make himself smaller. He carried 2 extra folding chairs and set them down without a word. When our eyes met, he offered me a shy half-smile. My heart ached. Perhaps, beneath his parents' shadow, there was still something tender left. When everyone had settled, I opened my copy of Pride and Prejudice. My voice, though shaky at first, steadied as I read Elizabeth Bennet's sharp words aloud. The group laughed, nodded, listened. For a moment, I was not a widow under siege. I was simply Reba, sharing a story under the fading sun, but the peace shattered with the sound of Aaron's voice. Well, isn't this charming? His tone was sharp enough to slice through the evening air. He strolled into the yard without invitation, Jessica trailing behind him in her polished shoes, her eyes scanning the gathering as though it were some eccentric display. "You're too old to play philanthropist, Mom," Aaron announced, his laugh loud, deliberate, cruel. "Wasting money on strangers when you can't even manage your own affairs. What's next? Turning the house into a charity hostel?" A silence spread among the chairs, neighbors glancing at one another, uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. My cheeks burned, but I gripped the book tighter. My instinct was to shout, to defend. But Jonathan's letter echoed in my mind. Strength did not always need to roar. I closed the book gently and said, calm and measured, "We're not discussing money tonight. This is about reading, about community." Aaron scoffed. Jessica folded her arms, her silence another kind of contempt. But I did not waver. I smiled at the audience, and slowly the group's attention returned to me. Ellen squeezed my hand, steadying me. We continued the reading, laughter rising again, defying the insult that had been hurled at me. By the time the last passage was read, the fairy lights glowed softly against the night. People clapped, thanked me, promised to return. Aaron and Jessica had long since left, their presence like a sour aftertaste. But the warmth of the gathering lingered stronger. As I began folding chairs, Ethan approached. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry for what they said, Grandma. They shouldn't have embarrassed you like that." I turned to him, startled by the sincerity in his eyes. He bent slightly closer, his words just for me. "I'll help you. You're not alone in this." In that moment, something inside me shifted. My fight was no longer only for my dignity or for Jonathan's memory. It was for Ethan, too, for the chance that he might grow up learning love over greed, respect over manipulation. I looked at the fairy lights swaying gently in the night breeze, and I felt it a spark rekindled. Not just survival, but hope. The Evanston Community Center pulsed with life that evening. Flags draped along the walls, a brass band played lively tunes, and the smell of hot dogs and buttered corn floated through the air. Families gathered in clusters, children darted between chairs, and laughter rippled like music. I had never seen the hall so full. This was my fundraiser, our fundraiser to establish a permanent reading program at the Lakeside House. My book club friends flanked me, their presence like a shield of warmth and solidarity. I stood at the podium, my hands resting lightly on the wood. "When Jonathan and I built our home," I began, my voice steady, "we dreamed it would always be full of stories. Tonight, with your support, that dream can grow into something larger for the entire community." Applause rang out, strong and affirming. For a fleeting moment, I felt pride rise in me, like the tide, and then the doors banged open. Aaron's voice carried above the music and chatter. "This has to stop." He strode in, Jessica at his side, her lips pressed thin. The crowd quieted, heads turning. The band faltered, notes hanging awkwardly in the air. Jessica's voice rang cold and clear. "Our mother is mentally unfit. She needs conservatorship to protect her assets before everything she has is wasted." Gasps swept through the hall. Whispers swirled like a sudden storm. My breath caught, my body freezing as though the air itself had turned to ice. My nightmare had arrived in broad daylight, not whispered behind closed doors, but screamed before my neighbors, my friends. I clutched the podium, willing my legs to hold me. My ears buzzed with the murmur of voices, pity, judgment, doubt. My dignity unraveled, thread by thread. All I wanted was to disappear into the floor, to be spared the shame of being dissected like this. In public, Aaron's voice boomed again. "She's too old to manage a house like that. She's squandering our father's legacy on strangers. We only want to protect her from herself." His words, rehearsed and venomous, struck harder than the July heat. I could not speak. My throat had closed. My heart hammered so wildly, I thought it might give out then and there. For a terrible moment, I believed them that maybe I was nothing more than an old woman clinging to memories, a fool stumbling into disgrace. And then, a voice broke through. "Stop." It was Ethan. He stepped forward from the back of the hall, tall and pale, but his voice carried like a bell. His hands shook, but his eyes blazed with conviction. "She's not unfit. She's been harassed, humiliated, and pressured. I've seen it myself." A hush fell, heavier than the whispers before. Ethan swallowed hard but pressed on. "I was there when Dad and Aunt Jessica mocked her for keeping the house. I saw them bring in a realtor without permission. I heard the insults. She has every right to live her life without being bullied." The room shifted. Neighbors exchanged looks, not of pity now, but of recognition, of judgment, cast in a new direction. My heart swelled with both fear and fierce pride. My grandson, Jonathan's grandson, was standing up. Not for money, not for inheritance, but for truth. Something inside me snapped open. Strength, long buried under grief and shame, flooded me like fire. I straightened my back, my voice finally breaking free. "There is something you all should know." I drew in a breath that felt as sharp as glass. Jonathan anticipated this. He left a codicil in his will. "Any family member who disrespects me, coerces me, or tries to force my hand will forfeit their inheritance." My words cut through the silence like a blade. I turned my eyes on Aaron and Jessica. "You called me stingy, mocked me, and tried to strip me of my home. You are disinherited." A stunned murmur swept through the hall. And then, like an answer from heaven, Tom rose from his chair near the front. He cleared his throat, his lawyer's voice carrying authority. "It is legally binding. Everything she has said is true." Applause broke out. Tentative at first, then swelling into a roar. Neighbors clapped. The book club cheered. Ellen's hands clapped loudest of all. My chest heaved, not from fear anymore, but from release. Outside, the first fireworks exploded across the sky. Red, blue, gold, each burst reflecting in the windows of the hall. The crowd's applause mingled with the thunder of liberation. For years I had been silent, eroded by waves of grief and betrayal. But tonight, the dam had broken. As the colors lit up the night, I felt it in my bones. I was free. August brought a different kind of life to the lakeside house, where once silence echoed through its hallways. Now voices rose, children reading aloud on the porch, neighbors carrying baskets of muffins and pies, the book club arranging chairs for workshops. The air was full of footsteps and laughter, of stories told and retold. The house no longer felt like a lonely shrine to the past. It had become what Jonathan always dreamed it might be, alive with purpose. We called it Jonathan's Reading Haven. The name was painted in elegant letters on a wooden sign by the front gate. Every time I passed beneath it, I felt his hand guiding mine, as though this was his last gift to me. The haven was no longer just mine. It belonged to the community, and in giving it to them, I had found myself again. Ethan became my right hand, appearing every week after his classes. He carried boxes of books, read stories to children, even fixed the rickety porch rail with his own tools. When he looked at me now, it was not with pity, but with respect. I saw in him the man his grandfather had hoped he might become: steady, kind, unafraid to stand for what was right. In the afternoons, when the house quieted, I returned to painting. My brush moved across the canvas, bringing the lake into being, its shifting colors, its endless horizon. One painting now hangs in the living room, a wide stretch of water beneath a rising dawn. Every stroke carried Jonathan's presence, every line a whisper of his laughter. It felt like speaking to him without words. As for Aaron and Jessica, their visits dwindled into silence. Stripped of inheritance, they sold their suburban house and moved somewhere smaller. When they did appear, their smiles were thin, conversations brittle. The air between us remained tense, but I did not bend. There was sorrow, yes, for the children I had raised, for the bond we had lost, but regret? Number. The line had been drawn, and for once, I had chosen myself. On the first evening of August, after the last guest had gone, and the lights of the haven glowed softly against the dusk, I stood by the window and watched Lake Michigan. The waves rolled steady against the shore, not eroding me anymore, but echoing strength. Eternal, constant, unyielding. I pressed my hand to the glass, the coolness grounding me. We did it, Jonathan. I whispered into the night. We did it. Life has taught me that silence in the face of betrayal only deepens the wound. I once believed keeping peace meant surrendering pieces of myself, but I've learned that dignity has no expiry date. Even when others dismiss us as old or fragile, we still have the power to draw boundaries, to choose respect over exploitation, and to create meaning that outlives bitterness. The waves that once eroded me now remind me of endurance. Steady, eternal, unbroken. If my story touched you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Because sometimes, the right story can change the way we live.